Ted on Peacock is Seth MacFarlane's latest project. Based on the animated titular lead of the movies, which came out in 2012 and 2015, the third installment of the Ted franchise serves as a prequel to the events of the films. On this podcast, we discuss recent installments of a different series every show. Today, that's the 50-minute pilot titled Just Say Yes. It's Monday, January 15th. Welcome to today's episode. Normally, we start this off by introducing the premise of the series that we're reviewing. However, I feel like the show's cold open has that covered.
In 1985, little John Bennett wished on a shooting star that his teddy bear would come to life. Magically, it happened. Ted was an instant worldwide phenomenon. But now it's 1993, and like every phenomenon, eventually nobody gives a shit.
So did you recognize the voice behind the intro?
It's Patrick Stewart, right?
No, it's not. They replaced Patrick Stewart.
But it was him in the movies.
You're right, it was. What's interesting about that is because of Seth MacFarlane loving Star Trek so much, him being connected with Stewart, it's actually the co-star of Patrick Stewart from the X-Men franchise, Ian McKellen.
Wow.
Yes.
So Ian McKellen from Lord of the Rings also, right?
And from everything.
Why did they switch?
They switched probably because of scheduling and stuff like that. That's the same reason why Mark Wahlberg couldn't return.
I heard yesterday that Seth MacFarlane did call Mark Wahlberg, and although Mark Wahlberg wished them the best, he still couldn't do it because of a TV series. Why didn't they just make a third film though?
Well, why didn't they make a third film? I don't think they were offered one. Universal Peacock came to MacFarlane after the Orville. I think it's on hiatus right now. It's not officially dead or anything, but it just finished its third season last year. We reviewed that. We talked about Seth MacFarlane there, but he was given the opportunity. It was like, hey, how would you like to extend the Ted franchise? And he's like, okay, well, I'd love to. And so they said, make it into a TV show. And then they even pitched the idea that it could be a sitcom, like multi-camera, that they would set up with some form of an animatronic doll or so. I don't know how they would do it. It would have to be CGI in a way that they did it back in interviews in 2012 or in the Emmys.
Right, because I remember I saw Ted...
Or Oscars, was it?
Ted, the bear, he was shown as the bear on TV, sitting on Jimmy Kimmel's couch, but he was able to talk to him, and I was like, is that just Seth MacFarlane just with a ton of balls over him?
I know what you're talking about. You're talking about the
obviously.
Andy, no, not Andy Serkis, but Andy.
How they do motion capture?
Yeah, I don't think he was sitting on the couch when they did it back then, though. I don't know how they were going to do or thinking about doing the sitcom, but the problem was they greenlit this 2 years ago, but it was still sort of a speedy turnaround, the casting and all of that, getting it out there. And so the main problem with doing a multi-camera sitcom was that they didn't have time for research and development.
Well, it's also you're starting at a disadvantage. I think a huge problem with this series, and I'm not giving away my opinion yet, but just starting with John, aging him down to high school, funny humor from the movie was the fact that John and Ted were both lowlives in their mid-30s. Mark Wahlberg was just playing a character that, was getting married.
He was immature.
But very immature. They were doing drugs the whole entire movie.
Yeah.
And it's if you're going to make the movie was wholesome, but now you're making it high school, and it's almost like you're restricting those characters.
But it wasn't just that they were homeless because they didn't have jobs or anything. He still had a life. He was getting married. In fact, I do find it funny how all these recastings occur, but they are not different than from the movies. If you remember, Mila Kunis was written out after being such a central role in the first film. She was going to marry his character.
She was the heart.
She's the reason why Ted survived that first film. And then suddenly, because in real life, Mila Kunis got pregnant, and so her character had to be written off as just a divorcee. And then and John had to fall in love with someone else, right?
It really hit me yesterday that the film is almost 12 years old, the first one, because I saw both in theaters, and I still remember it pretty well. I remember even going to the theater and hearing a 5-year-old say that they want to see Ted, but
because they think it's
because they thought it was going to be a family movie, but because the poster was just Mark Wahlberg and the stuffed animal.
And they even sold, I think this was a Conan interview back in the day, they had teddy bears that were being sold that had the tag of R-rated so that when you squeezed its paw or something, it said something dirty. But I do find it funny that when you squeeze Ted in the show or in the movies...
I love you.
Yes, Tara Strong is the person who's voicing that. Miss
oh,
Minutes.
wow.
They even changed the names of the parents of John at this point.
Really?
And that's why, and obviously they had to recast them. And
so it's not Maddie and Susan?
no,
in
I
the
think it was
movies?
Steve and Helen in the original. Yes. And so, like, this could be maybe like a multiverse situation where Ted exists in several different realities, and this one is close to what we... Like, they kept the fact that he's from Massachusetts, that he has the Boston accent, that he's going through these rough times, and that Ted came around, I think, in 1985, and now it's 1993?
Yeah, it takes place in the 90s.
So before we jump into the plot of the episode, because this one is called Just Say Yes, which is a run on Nancy Reagan's DARE initiative and everything, which actually ended in 2009. So I think you were at the very tail end of DARE.
I don't remember.
Did you ever have an officer come into your room and start talking about
Yeah,
drugs?
we did in middle school, but I think by that point, DARE was still being laughed at. Like, I think it was already a joke.
I think it was a joke when it first started around, but was it still called DARE is what I'm asking. Was it before
know.
or after 2009?
It was after 2009.
It was after 2009, so you missed DARE. That's so weird. That makes
So
me
you
feel
remember
old.
it pretty well?
Yes, because I had a 6th grade officer who came in there, and he was super cool because he spent the entire time telling us all these stories about these dead bodies he would come across. Like, about this lady who got
cool.
eaten by a 6th grade classroom. Yes, of course we were. He told us a story about how this kid came up to him, like a 5th grader, and took his gun.
Wait, what?
At the school. Like, he was just having a conversation, and the kid thought it would be funny if he snuck up behind the police officer as a 5th grader and just grabbed his gun from...
I remember my middle school police officer saying that if a kid did that they would have to put you down with a taser or like an actual gun.
The thing was, he was obviously upset about it, but he said that was the reason why they had that clip on there, so that people can't just pull the guns away. And so as soon as someone started jerking at that, I think he like elbowed the kid in the face accidentally. His pepper spray also went off during our graduation in 6th grade. I remember that. They had to clear out the room. All the parents had to leave. It was a fiasco. And so, yes, this is definitely, there's room for comedy in the DARE element, but I don't know how much of this episode is about that.
Well, I always thought that Ted was a parody on Chucky. Because, like, Chucky coming to life, being a doll that kills
I see
people.
it. Yeah. And then there's that R-rated dog film that came out this year, too, that I was thinking about.
Oh, like Pets or Strays.
Where
Strays what it was.
it's almost marketed toward that innocent kid age, but, like, for the grown-up versions of them.
Kind of like
Barney.
Sausage Party or, like, an adult version of Toy Story.
Or, like, this new Mickey Mouse horror film that's coming out.
Yeah.
Yeah. I love it when they take what's supposed to be innocent and just make it outrageous and absurd. But did it work?
Here, I'm going to give it a passing grade, a 6 out of 10, because I do think that the tone and the heart from the films are both in the show, but also I feel like it has a lot of growing pains that it has to get through.
So when Maddie makes Ted go to school with John, so the parent of John,
yes,
that's the dad, right? And he's played by Scott
Grimes. I was glad to see him
from the Orville, American Dad, Band of Brothers, Shameless, you name it. And he's also a great singer, so I wouldn't be surprised if he starts singing in one of these episodes.
So it was actually Blair's idea. Blair is John's cousin, and she's living with Susan and Maddie. I would say a worse version of almost Back to the Future parents, where Maddie, he can be kind of he can definitely be like verbally abusive to Susan, but it's
the 90s.
Yes,
so that's okay.
It's based off of Blair's suggestion because she feels like Ted, whenever John has to go to school, Ted is just a nuisance and he causes so many problems. In fact, one of my favorite jokes from the episode was in the first 10 minutes while everyone is out of the house during the day, Ted goes into Maddie's closet and pulls out a gun and says, "Bear arms, the bear arms." He sets up a slipping slide and then he shoots the gun off in the front yard and then slips through the slide.
Yeah.
And then that ends up, another bullet goes off, breaks the glass, and then breaks the TV.
This is exactly like the movies then, because in the first movie, you remember it was Ted's antics which got him to where John's, Mila Kunis's character was basically telling John to kick him out.
And also the TV is a straight reference to the fight scene that I looked up after I saw the episode where the TV falls onto Mark Wahlberg's like stomach.
Was that the first one or the second one?
That was the first one.
That was still the first one? It's funny because, those two films sort of blend together in my mind. And Liam Neeson doesn't make an appearance.
I think he's only in the second one.
All right, so Ted is making a mess at home. John is at school.
He's also still inviting hookers over. Again, a reference to the first film.
He'd only be like, what, 8 years old at this point?
I think that Ted, he's just like already fully formed by the time that he was.
I did try to look at a picture back to back of him in the movies, and I thought they made him a little slimmer. Like maybe he was just a little younger.
I didn't see any difference.
All right. That's just my assumption.
So you don't know how they were able to do Ted, like how they were able to.
So the actors said that they were given almost nothing. Like at the very beginning, they were given like a pair of eyeballs on like a stick to look at. But by the end, it was like they took those away when they were actually filming, because I guess it's easier to edit in something that's not there at all.
So it is complete CGI.
Yes, it's complete CGI, but like they weren't even able to look at anything. When they were cast, though, originally they were all sent life-size versions of the Ted doll, so that they could hang around it and be comfortable with it, even though they weren't even going to be acting with it.
It doesn't even seem like Maddie is that like big a fan of Ted or needs to interact with him too much, because the only scenes where we get is when like the whole entire family is together. Other than that, it's usually just John and Ted kind of riffing off each other. And then of course when you go to high school, you get the classic things where Ted is making fun of John's bullies. Also, John is in love with someone who is in college. Probably the best in the show's premise, what I focus on the most in the pilot, is that Ted is trying to get kicked out of school. So he's trying to get caught with drugs, but whatever he does...
So he gets in trouble at home, and they send him to school. It feels like he's in jail at that point.
Yes.
It does remind me a little bit of that old cartoon where there was that really smart dog that ends up going to school with the cartoon kid. I never remember the name of it. But it was on in like 2005. I used to watch
that all the time, and I don't remember the name.
But the dog never tried to get out of school. He loved school. He was like a nerd dog.
Well, and the principal of the school even says that Ted is not going to be allowed to leave, because she knows that Ted is trying to get kicked out of school. But then that's when John comes up with the school has a zero tolerance for drugs. And of course, this being the 90s, weed was just kind of becoming a thing that people were really starting to do.
I have a secret to tell you. Weed actually came around a little bit before the 90s.
No, I mean, but this was... 90s is when it kind of had like a big rise, right? There was a big spike. I don't know. I was only born in the 90s. I don't remember them at all. Anyways,
you're like the cast then, because that was what they were asking. They were like, what do you guys remember from the 90s? And they said nothing really.
John doesn't remember anything?
Well, the thing is, John is actually 26 years old in real life.
Oh, wow. He's older than me.
He's by a little bit, yes. And so he didn't say he remembered anything either, did he? Yeah. Go ahead.
My summary is, after Ted accidentally shoots a TV, he attends school with John to get kicked out. Ted tries buying drugs from Blair. That is, again, the cousin of John.
And she's supposed to be like pretty straight-laced, except for this drug thing, right?
Yeah, but she's also having to pay rent at the house, which Susan doesn't know about.
So she reminds me a little bit of like, because I want to bring in that 90s show.
That 90s show?
Because that was based in 1995. And
I would say this is honestly better than that 90s show.
I wasn't comparing the two in that way, but they shoehorned so many 90s references, trying to just throw it in your face all the time. And I felt like, how do you not when you're approaching something like this?
I actually didn't get that many 90s references.
I mean, there's clothing, there's the posters.
But I guess that's so many TV shows. So many TV shows focus on the 80s and 90s, especially as of now. Maybe I'm just used to it at this point.
That's fair.
But in the end, everyone gets caught. Blair gets caught because she accidentally sold weed to Ted, and then John was able to manipulate Ted into having him do weed. And then when Susan and Blair are talking, it turns out that John and Ted are actually in her closet because Ted still needs weed to get kicked out of school. And then it's just this whole discussion. Blair gets kicked out, and then there was almost this day
kicked out of the house or kicked out of school?
Kicked out of the house.
Okay.
Yeah, she's going to live somewhere else. And then there was almost this Deus Ex Machina box that they just introduced like 40 minutes in. Apparently Ted, as we saw in the intro, became so famous he was doing late night shows and films that he was going to do a film with Sylvester Stallone, but it was so bad that they ended up not doing it. Ted got really sad, so Sylvester Stallone doesn't make an appearance, but apparently gave him his Rocky mouth guard. And Maddie, being such a big fan of like the 80s and 70s and Rocky, Ted is like, I'll give you this mouth guard if Blair can stay. And then Blair comes back, and everything is as it was.
Have you ever seen F is for Family?
Yes, I saw the pilot a long time ago.
Maddie sounds a little bit like Bill Burr's character from that. Like, he sounds like he's the begrudging father who will be, like, he's not... He can be bribed.
I think
maybe a little bit Malcolm in the Middle-ish too, where like he's not innocent.
Yes, no, because the thing about Maddie is that he's really dumb. And I don't think I've ever seen Scott Grimes play dumb before, because he plays doctors, he plays villains. You have to have some sense of intelligence there, but I guess for a comedy, when you're just supposed to... He must have been in the Orville, wasn't he? Or am I remembering that wrong?
Yes, of course. No, that's where he sings all the time.
And then also, this reminded me of Family Guy. It's definitely Seth MacFarlane humor, and if you like his shows, I can't imagine you not liking this.
I called Seth MacFarlane because I begrudgingly respect the hell out of the dude, because I remember he was like he was the youngest like showrunner or something like that in history at like 26 years old when he pitched Family Guy.
And Family Guy was shown right after the Super Bowl.
This was all addressed in the Orville, where I had my notes all organized. But I also remember calling him the Amazon of, like, eventually you'll find something that you like of his, because he's involved in so much. However, you'd think, like, how does he have time to do all this stuff with the Orville, with Ted, with Family Guy, with American Dad, with all this other... Yeah, and the truth is, he came out and said that, like, he doesn't really do anything but the voices at this point for Family Guy for American Dad.
So he just creates it, and then he stars in it, but he doesn't do any of the...
I think for the first few seasons, he was much more involved. Like, he does one thing at a time. He's either 100% invested in it, or he trusts the people who are involved in it, and then he goes and does his, like, voices. But, like, for this, he wrote, he directed, he pitched, he show ran. He didn't really even have to pitch it, but like he did everything.
Yeah, so really quick, Peacock calls this like an event series, and the only other event series I remember on Peacock was the Continental, and that was only 3 episodes. So is this just supposed to be one season, or do you know if they're trying to go for multiple seasons?
He left the door open. Basically, if this takes off and it's huge, like the first movie was never really supposed to have a sequel, but it was made with a $50 million budget, and it became the 9th highest grossing film of that year.
It was that successful?
Best grossing film for Universal Productions. So that is why Universal Productions came back a decade later and said, hey, you want to do a TV show?
So the second movie must have really been, because I know it got bad reviews, got worse reviews than the first one, but also maybe financially did worse?
The opening was a financial disappointment. I think they missed what they were projecting by like 10 to 15 million, but overall it still looked like it made more than its budget back. It's just not enough to require another film. But originally, when he first thought of the character Ted, which would have been like a couple decades ago, he wanted to do a TV series then too. Like, I don't know if it would have been animated, like cartoon animated,
like Napoleon Dynamite. I'm so glad that they did not do an animated. I actually had that down as one of my pros, because usually whenever movies try to do some type of thing like this, maybe the CGI would be too hard.
It's 7 episodes. It's supposedly very expensive because of all the CGI they had to put into it. A 50-minute pilot for a comedy seems kind of baffling. It seems a little
way
scary.
Too long. It was way too long, but you have to enjoy the references, and I feel like enjoy the movie to really enjoy the series. Like they're watching Flash Gordon at the very end of it and hitting a bong straight up from the first movie. And also I just like the episode's premise, even though I was saying that you are restricting the characters. Ted going to high school, just seeing him like walking right next to John, just the visual of that is really funny in and of itself as well.
It's also interesting how you have like characters who are well defined in successful franchises later on, like Sheldon from Big Bang Theory. Years later get cast as kids, like the people who play them don't necessarily look or act like their future versions 100%.
Yeah, John honestly, John does not look like Mark Wahlberg, and I'm pretty sure that the differences between the characters are there, but it's been such a long time. He said
he wasn't going to try to imitate Mark Wahlberg,
which was a good idea,
Yeah, and it ended up working, because I could totally see where they were like, I can't believe that they tried to recast this, and it just,
also, another thing that the show did right was it didn't get too political. I remember the second one strangely did have like a political message to it.
It's fine. The Daily Beast loved it. They said this anti-PC humor is what they love to see.
Oh, well, that's not why I'm talking about.
And then Rolling Stone also found it surprisingly funny. Overall, it has an IMDb rating of 8, but then the bad reviews are more like 67% Rotten Tomato critic score, for 55% or 55 on Metacritic. And then you have IGN saying it's okay. Ebert, IndieWire, Decider were less enthusiastic. So
yeah, no,
mix.
And I see where it's coming from with the bad reviews, because I don't really understand why we have to follow Blair. She takes up a lot of the 50-minute runtime, and she wasn't even in the original films. So I don't really understand why they added her.
So your favorite character is still Ted, though?
Yes, Ted. He makes the show. But also not having Mark Wahlberg is such a big... I know that he said that he was busy, but still, that does knock it down a few points for me.
I don't normally like to just reiterate other people's interviews, but I did happen to catch one where they asked a kind of interesting question that what if Mark Wahlberg agreed to be in like one episode, like kind of a Dean Winchester in the Winchesters,
right?
And they kind of do a flashback or flash forward, obviously, of him addressing or doing some form of episode.
And what they say.
Seth MacFarlane was like, yeah, it's an open possibility. That would be the way it would have to be done because of how busy this guy's career is.
I do feel like also the show is kind of like those terrible SNL movies. I'm having the same feeling of that as I do when I watch the pilot, because it felt a little bit like MacGruber, Conehead, Superstar, Pat. The basic premise seemed like it was being expanded a little bit bigger than it needed to be. Mm-hmm. I think what I'm trying to say is that I think the show's fine. I'm going to give it a 6 out of 10, but I do find it a little unnecessary.
Are you going to watch all 7 episodes?
I might at some point, because you're going to get a laugh from the show.
I'm going to tell you one other thing, because now that he's done with this project, he's obviously on to his next one. And I think his next one, well, they've been working on this at the same time a little bit. Naked Gun reboot. You've heard about this? With Liam Neeson?
Is he... Wait, what?
Yeah, Liam Neeson and Akiva Schaffer from Lonely Island is the one who's directing it. So that's actually going to come out, I think, this year. I think Liam Neeson has come out and said that's for sure coming out this year. So that's what's coming down the line for us. We're doing our next podcast on Boy Swallows Universe.
I bet you that Liam Neeson was cast because Leslie Nielsen is the name of the actor who was in the original Naked Gun films.
I think he also has that connection with Seth MacFarlane for the Trick cereal. The cool thing about the show also is like everybody who is cast has some connection with MacFarlane. It just seems like he likes to keep his camp tight. And when they weren't doing the filming and stuff like that, they would go off and do like fun little adventures together, go to movies and just bond and stuff, which you've talked about.
Reminded me a lot of Extended Family.
Or your own experiences when you were like in college and doing the film stuff, how like the directors would take you out afterwards to kind of keep that symmetry going. Anything else you want to add?
No, that's about it.
Thanks for listening. We'll see you on the next episode. Hope you enjoyed this one. Bye.
Bye.